Most of what you worry about as a mom or dad doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you raise children who know that God is there for them every day, all day. What matters is that they choose kindness and love above everything else, and that they can know that you are in their corner. The little things that we hyper focus on, did they pass their test? Did they give it their all? Did they obey me the first time? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. Today I have a beautiful conversation with Kathy Eggers, author of the Homegrown Preschooler and A Year of Playing Skillfully. We explore the importance of play for our children and how it impacts the development of the brain and the foundation of their best learning throughout their lives. As we discuss the time invested in allowing the space for our children to play, we also talk about the profound impact that time has on the opportunity to develop rich, life-giving relationships with our children. Listen in now to hear more.
I remember sitting in therapy when I was in my 30s, and I remember her asking me, let's start with your childhood. How would you describe your childhood? And I immediately, without hesitation, said, oh, it was a good childhood. But as I started unpacking that, my childhood was full of a lot of trauma, if I'm being honest, and a lot of expectations. And I was, in some ways, a firstborn. It's a long story, but very responsible. I grew up real fast, and I felt at a young age that I was the caretaker of my entire family. So I grew up with that pressure, if you will. And it took me years to really recognize that.
How was your entire family composed at that time as far as siblings and parents?
Sure. Yeah. I'm one of four siblings. I have an older brother, and then I have a much younger brother and sister. So I also kind of parented my younger brother and sister, and my parents have now passed, and they call me daily, much like we would our mom, right? My younger brother and sister call me, and I feel that mom role, feel kind of the grandparent role almost to their children. So 2 boys, 2 girls.
Well, that sounds interesting. So that's the makeup of my family when I was young too. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a little town called Laurel, Mississippi. It's now kind of a famous town. If you're an HGTV fan, there's a TV show about it. But I grew up there and lived there until my 20s. I went to college at Mississippi State. And what's fun is my 2 youngest now attend Mississippi State. Even though they grew up in Georgia, in Atlanta, they found their way to Mississippi State. So it's very fun to have some kids at your college.
Yeah. Well, let me back up a little bit. I know, so you said that there were some difficult things about your childhood, and it's interesting. I think that when we experience trauma, even if we don't know how to connect later with that and even to admit it was there, I think that there are things that we do in our childhood that we can look back and we recognize later about ourselves. You know, the things we were interested in, the ways that we behaved, how we kind of lived out our days. How would you say that as a child, you really lived out your days? What were your interests and things of that nature?
I love this part. And I think this is the part where I came with that good childhood. Listen, I was born a performer. I loved it. I remember gathering my friends around, and we knew the entire album of Grease, and not appropriate, but we didn't know that, right? We were so young. We sang it and we performed it, and we, thought we were on stage all the time. And, we lived in a small area where we could go out on our go-karts and go in the creek and catch crawfish and stay outside all day and not come home until dinner time, all the things.
Yeah.
I remember my first best best friend lived across the street, and she had an open carport with a huge Barbie house, and I would
Mm,
look out my door to see if she was out there playing in it, and if she was, I would run across the street, and we would play Barbies. I mean, that part of just exploration and curiosity and, excitement about life, that was such a fun part of my childhood. I
yeah.
loved that part.
And that is, again, just reminiscent of the way that I think that we spent our childhood. So much of
Mhm.
the time, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, where we were outside and
Yes.
spending those hours and hours just exploring the world that we lived in, and
It was that
so I think that
uninterrupted play, right? That
yeah,
uninterrupted, that free to just explore without someone hovering over us. We had to figure it
yeah,
out, and that figuring it out is where all the adventure was.
exactly. And
Yeah.
no distraction. We were there just enjoying life,
Yeah.
to the degree that we could anyway. So, moving forward then, like, into your middle and high school years, did you get interested in anything in particular that was, a sport or a theater or anything of that nature?
Well, I was definitely kind of your cheerleader, basketball player girl. I loved both of those. I love sports. I probably love sports if we're going to be stereotypical almost as much
Mhm.
as guys. I do love football. The way I connected with my dad when I was younger is
Mm.
that we would on Sunday mornings, we didn't go to church when I was little. He would watch Roy Rogers, if you know that
Oh,
show. It was like a cowboy show. And then
yeah.
after that, we would watch the New Orleans Saints because that was
Mm,
our closest professional team where I grew up in Mississippi.
right.
So I learned the game of football at a young age. So I loved sports. So any kind of sport I could be involved in or I could cheer for, I did that. And then I started babysitting. And
Mm.
that's where I really found my love for children. And that's how that started for me is that babysitting and that connection I had with young children. It started in my young high school years.
And if I'm not mistaken, did I get this right? You went to a fairly small high school?
I went to a very small high school. It was a
Yeah.
private school. We had 300 students in the entire school. I was the only girl in my senior class. I get to brag that I was the homecoming queen.
That's so
Didn't
sweet.
have a lot didn't have a lot of competition, but I do love to share that story. So, yes, I went to a very tiny school. In fact, it's no longer there, which is very sad. But we had a reunion last year for the entire school for the last 40 years, and it was lovely to see people from my early childhood all through my high school years.
That's incredible. That is,
Yeah.
I mean, that's really unusual to hear the only female, unless you're a homeschool student, right?
Right, right. The
The
only
only one.
female for it was my junior and senior year. Just
That's
different
crazy.
reasons. Girls graduated early, they went to the public school, and I landed there. And it was only a class of 17. So it was me and
Yeah.
16 boys who all thought they were my brother. We all just thought like siblings. But it was fun.
That's that's fun. That sounds like a lot of fun. No girl drama for you during those couple
No,
years.
I didn't have any of the mean girl stuff. It was pretty
That's
easy for
good.
me.
So, after you graduated from there, did you go to college? Did you have other plans after you graduated from high school?
Yeah, I went to Mississippi State. It was about 2.5
Mhm.
hours away from my hometown. I lived real close to another university called Southern Miss in Hattiesburg,
Yeah.
Mississippi. That was too close, right? That was a little too close to home. I wanted to be adventurous. Neither of my parents attended college. Well, my dad did a little college, but didn't graduate from college.
Mhm.
So I thought I was so brave going off 2.5 hours to Mississippi State. And I didn't know what I wanted to study. As I remember it, and I don't know about your parents, my parents were more hands off with my decisions and my
Oh,
education.
yeah.
They weren't like, my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. That's all he would say is be a lawyer. But I knew that I wanted to do something with children, but I didn't see myself as a traditional school teacher. So I
Right.
remember going to college and asking a counselor, I'm like, hey, I know I want to work with kids. I don't know how I want to work with kids. And they steered me towards educational psychology. And in hindsight, I think they were right. I think I would have loved to have been a children's counselor.
Mm.
But I took a child development elective my sophomore year in college. And in that elective, you had to do lab work in the school. You had to go work in the preschool, work in the infant toddler center. And I fell in love with that. I fell in
Mm.
love with that age group, that early birth to five, before they go off to school in the traditional school. And so
Right.
I changed my major from educational psychology to child development and just it was just the right place for me. It really was. Great experience at Mississippi State.
Did you get married during those years and start a family, or was that later after you graduated?
That was later. Yeah, that was
Okay.
later.
So you went out and started working with kids, not with a
I
whole lot of
did.
experience to bring from the mom bucket necessarily, but you were still loving it. And
So what was interesting about that, Suzanne, is I thought I knew it all, right? In my
mhm,
young 20s, not a mom, but I had a
right.
degree in child development. I thought that I could give the best advice to these moms. I ended up in preschools and child development centers.
Mhm,
And as a young adult, I became an administrator. Like at 23, I became in charge of like 35 employees. I directed schools, which was super young, right? I was
yeah.
not ready, but boy, did I think I was. I'm a confident girl, and I showed all that confidence as this young
Mhm,
knowledge. I had the knowledge, and I even had a little experience, but what I lacked was the wisdom.
mhm.
And that is what, looking back now as a 57-year-old, I want to tell young moms. When they're out there listening to their peers give them advice, or I'm like, hey, that's good, but don't discount wisdom. Find yourself an older mom, and you might not
Mhm.
agree with everything, but there is value in wisdom. And I didn't
Yeah.
have that as a young director, but I can look back now and admit that.
Now you can look and see that, but I love that. I mean, and as a young mom myself, if, I had to put my children in some childcare situations when they were very young, and I would have not liked you at 23 telling me what to do. Like, "Do you even
Right.
know what
I
I'm talking
mean,
about?"
you don't I had no idea. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Now, how I became a mom is so fun and fascinating. It
Mhm.
is because of my job in the Child Development Center. I had a client come in and say, "Hey, my sister is thinking about placing a baby for adoption. Do you know anywhere, any help in that?" And the baby was 9 months old. And I said, "Oh, I have always wanted to adopt." And that's a whole story of that started in college. And I can share that if you want, but I've always
Oh,
wanted to
absolutely.
adopt. I'll adopt that baby. And 2 days later, Suzanne, I became a parent to a 9-month old.
That's
Like
amazing.
that.
Well, now you have to back up and tell us that story a little bit because that's pretty
Okay.
incredible story.
It's a pretty incredible story. So in college, I was so privileged to be discipled by this young mom. She was in her mid 30s. She had adopted 2 children. Her husband was a
Mm,
doctor on campus. And so she just let me come in. I babysat for her. She let me watch the way that she parented. And I was so in awe of this lady parenting these adopted children. But that's not what did it. What did it was one day she says, this young girl, her name was Dodie, she's 13 and
mm,
pregnant. She's going to live with us for the next 7, 8 months. They took her in and walked with her through that pregnancy and placing that child for adoption. And
mm,
I got just again, the privilege to walk alongside this young girl. I was only 20 at the time. So I
yeah.
became her little bestie, her mentor, and I got to walk with her and I got to literally be in the room when she handed that baby to the adoptive family.
Mm,
And it changed me. There was something in that I said, one, I have a heart for women who choose life for their children, who choose
mm,
that difficult decision to place that baby for adoption. It is not giving up that baby, it is choosing life and placing that baby. And I had such a heart for that. And then number two, I'm like, I want to do this. I
mm.
feel like this is my journey to adopt children. And I did. I ended up adopting 6 out of my 8 are adopted.
That's
And, it started from that girl and her willingness to, at such a young age, be brave, and that couple to support her through that journey.
So you became a mother for the first time to a 9-month-old.
A
Tell
9-month
me what
old.
that looked like, because
I
really
was
that would be
terrified. I mean, it was fun because I was confident. Remember, confident girl,
mhm,
I got this. I
you
remember
knew
we get the
everything.
baby. We have nothing. And we had just sold our house and moved into a tiny apartment because we were just trying to refocus. So I lived in this little 2-bedroom apartment, had
Mm,
nothing, had to call a friend of mine that worked for me, brought me like a 20-year-old crib. We put it up. I remember my sister drove down with a bunch of clothes because, again, we stopped at Target on the way to pick up the baby to buy some bottles and formula because,
mm,
again, we had nothing. It was crazy. But the first thing I noticed when we got him, his fingernails and toenails were long. And I'm like, oh, we got to cut those. But I was scared to death to cut them. And so I had to call another friend. I'm like, this is going to sound ridiculous, but can you come over here and cut his toenails and his fingernails? Because I think I'm going to cut him. And so she did. And it was a beautiful journey because this little boy, when we got him at 9 months, he was still eating formula only. He was not crawling. He was not sitting up. He was developmentally delayed.
mm,
He wasn't babbling and the things that a normal 8, 9-month-old would be doing. And within 2 weeks of attention and of intentionality with him, all of that changed. He was mama, dada, sitting up, crawling, eating, all
Mm.
within a few weeks. And that is not anything against his birth mother. I mean, his tummy
No.
grower, as I used to call her
Mhm.
to John Michael. I would say, "It's your tummy grower." And, she's darling and she did what she knew was best for this child and was trying to do her best then as a young mom. But it was crazy. It was crazy. I would show up and people are like, "Wait, what? You have a 9-month-old? How is this possible?" But, the rest of my stories are very similar. God did just kind of drop our babies, most of them, in our lap. We had the stories are a book that you wouldn't believe them. I mean, one baby we had for 24 hours, I can't remember now if it's 2 or 3 days. And then we had to return him to the birth mother because in Georgia, you can take the baby back for 10 days. Then
Mm.
12 hours later, the phone rang and we got another baby who's our daughter. 10 months later, got her biological brother.
Wow.
Spent 3 years adopting from Guatemala. We adopted several from Guatemala and then brought home 2 adults. We brought 2 adults home, not just a child.
Mhm.
So the stories are crazy how my family has been grown. And then I birthed 2 children as well. But I wouldn't trade it. We're a hot
Yeah.
mess. We are a loud, just crazy family, but it is the best thing. It's the best thing. It's my greatest joy.
I have to get back and ask this question because we didn't hit your marriage point, but,
Yes.
you knew you wanted to adopt and had seen
Yes.
that and mentored through that. When you got married, was that a thing that you talked about? I mean, was this something that was known to your spouse, and
Yes, I
how did
I
they
did have
feel?
that conversation. Now, I will tell you the way it looked in my mind and the way that I informed my husband was, "Hey,
Mhm.
listen, I feel called to do adoption and this is how I think it's going to work. I'm going to birth 3 kids, then we're going to go to China and we're going to adopt a little girl from China because I had a heart for China and that was our plan." And I think he looked at me and went,
Yeah.
Okay." And he was gracious and
Mm.
he, said yes. And we did attempt to adopt from China. We did adopt 3 children, but still I thought, okay, well, we have our 3 children. Let's go to China. So we completed all the paperwork in China. And along the way, you have to sign a document saying that if you get pregnant, you'll let them know because they don't want you to adopt and birth a child within a year. So of course
Mm.
I'm signing this document because I'd never been pregnant. It's on the document. Our dossier is sitting in China. Now it's months to get a dossier ready. It's six,
Right.
7 months, a lot of money. We get the dossier. It's in China. I think I have the flu. I'm on my way to a homeschool field trip and I tell my friends, I don't feel well. I think I have the flu. And we stop at Chick-fil-A and one of the friends shows up with a pregnancy test and says, "Let's just take one." And I'm like, "I'm not pregnant. I've never been pregnant. I'm not." And I was pregnant. So had to cancel that adoption plan, got pregnant, had a baby. Again, tried to adopt from China, got pregnant a second time. And my children to this day are kind of frustrated that they're not adopted from China. Like the birth children, they're like, gosh, the people, they'll say, well, we're adopted from China, even though they're not. But anyway, so just crazy, crazy stories how our family was grown. And my husband was like, he was agreeable. I
Yeah.
don't know looking back, was it his calling or if it was my calling? I know it was my calling, but he was
Yeah.
agreeable.
That's great, and I think that there's a lot of the time that, I meet younger kids and they're not married yet, but they have that idea that they want to
Mhm.
adopt, and for
Yeah.
whatever reasons, I think pro-life movement, I think, has a lot to do with that for a lot of the kids that I interact with, or they've been parts of large families who have
Mhm.
adopted. So I think that that's another experience, but it's a beautiful thing to me, and I always think, when you get married and you already know that, that's got to be a conversation that may not always go the way you think it would. Because I think people
Right.
who've not ever considered adoption or who've not really been around those reasons for people, they've never even thought about it sometimes. It's never even occurred to them.
Absolutely, and I do think it is a calling. I do think it's
Mm.
something that should not be jumped into lightly. I mean, any parenting in general is very difficult, but, parenting children whose stories start with loss,
Mhm.
immediately you're gonna have trauma from the get-go.
Yeah.
Before you even got those children, their story started with loss, so you've got to be willing to take that on and be willing to do the work necessary to help
Mm.
them overcome that loss and work through that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you started parenting and I know your child development background that you shared with us a little bit, but the first time I met you, it was the homegrown preschooler. So you
Yeah,
went from child development and running the facility to being a homeschool mom. So
yeah.
tell me a little bit about how you came to that and what that looked like for you.
It was also in college, if you can believe it. College was a pivotal time for
Mhm.
me. So, as I mentioned earlier, I have a brother and sister much younger than me. And I remember going back home. It must have been my sophomore year because my parents moved away from Laurel after that. So, I went
Mm,
back home to Laurel my sophomore year, and my little brother and sister, their best friends, were being homeschooled. And we went to their house, and I was so amazed at their family dynamic. The dad was a CPA, but his office was at home, and
mm,
so these 4, it was 2 children, the parents, they were home all the time together, interacting, schooling. The daughter was helping him with his business some. They were traveling together. They were doing ministry together. It was amazing to watch just their dynamic. It didn't even have anything to do with the academics. It had to
mm,
do with watching the way this family interacted and the way these children interacted with adults because he would have clients come in and the daughter would help. I was fascinated by
mm,
this. And as an educator, as a child development person, one of the beautiful things about being in that field is you get to watch these aha moments when children
mm,
have them. And I thought, I want that for my children. I want to watch the aha moments. I want my family dynamic to look like this. I want my children
mm.
to be able to travel with me and have the opportunity to meet people of different ages. And so again,
No,
before I even married, I knew that homeschooling would be something. Now, I didn't know what it would look like if we would do it forever, but I knew that it was something I wanted to consider. And
mm,
then when we adopted John Michael, like I said, he had some developmental delays and he needed a little bit of special instruction, some creative ways to teach. So it was a natural fit for our family and continued to be because as we continued to add children through adoption, it just worked for our family. It gave them
yeah,
time to attach. Didn't have to rush. Even when we had to move to Guatemala for almost a year to finish our adoptions there. So even
mm,
that provided an opportunity. My children got to go with us, some of them, not all of them. We went back and forth. It was crazy. But because of homeschooling, we could do that. So I was thankful that I got to meet this family. And this was in the late 80s. So it was still kind of hush hush and still
yeah,
not
yeah.
very well known homeschooling. I was still considered a little bit weirdo when I decided to do it, but I'm okay with that.
How did you find yourself moving from homeschooling your children to founding, homegrown preschooler and doing the work that you were doing there, speaking and,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that transition for you.
That's a great question. So when I was in the early childhood, child development world, I wrote some books there. I wrote my first book when I was 30. It was an activity book. It's still a great little
Mm,
seller called 101 Easy, Wacky, Crazy Activities. And the other
mm,
thing I did as a young director is I started speaking for other events. I got to speak at a local event in Atlanta. Then I would move to the state event. And then I started traveling across the country, even internationally as a speaker, but in the child development world. So I'd train
mm,
teachers and I would train educators and I would
right.
give keynote speeches. And so I love that. And I remember clearly I was sitting at a Bible study actually at Starbucks with a group
Mhm,
of girls. And I said, you know what's interesting is that no one teaches homeschool parents about play. Now, at this time, I think we wrote the Homegrown Preschooler in 2013. So 12 years ago.
mhm.
Play, no one was talking about play back then. It was
Yeah.
you would take a more structured curriculum and water it down for your preschooler, right? That was what most
Mhm,
people did. And so I'm like, somebody needs to be talking child development to these homeschool mamas. Somebody needs to do this. So why not me? I've already written books. I speak. Let's do this. So I asked a friend of mine who was in the Bible study. I said, hey, listen, you have a son who's on the spectrum. Why don't you write this book with me? Because you can bring that perspective in there. We can add in some special needs stuff. And we wrote the Homegrown Preschooler, never intending to start a business. We thought we're writing one book to add to my books, the end. We ended up taking our book to, I think at that time it was a conference in Ohio,
mhm,
just going to take our book, right? And what we noticed talking to young moms, because in the book we say, here's how you would set up some activities. These are all the things you would do developmentally to help your young children. We're talking like 3 to 7.
right.
Every mom, and I'm not kidding you, Suzanne, every mom. Do you have that plan? Like, can you just give me that plan? I don't know how to plan for a little kid. Well, how does that look like through play? Can you spell that out for me? We're like, well, we gave you an empty lesson plan and all the ideas. Well, could you do that? And so then we went back and we wrote a year of playing skillfully because we
Mhm.
thought, yeah, we could do that. I mean, we could live this out. This is the way that I taught my children. We learned
Right.
through play at my house. So it was
Yeah.
literally just writing down the ideas that I had lived out and then putting it in a curriculum format. Preschoolers don't need a curriculum. Listen, they do
Mhm.
not. But sometimes parents need a guide.
Moms,
And
yeah.
so that's why we did that, wrote a year of playing skillfully. So that's kind of how it started. And then last year, Leslie decided it was time for her to move on. I had actually stepped out of speaking. That's why you haven't seen me when I lost a son. He
Mhm.
passed away in 2022 leukemia. And once he got sick with cancer in 2019, I stopped working totally. So I
Mhm.
took a break from like 2019 until last summer. And I bought out Leslie and changed, rebranded a little bit. We've redone a year of playing skillfully. And now
Yeah.
this year I'm getting back on speaking again and I'm ready to get back out there to again encourage these young moms that you can do this through play. You can teach your children through play.
And that's amazing. I first was introduced to you probably just very early on. You were probably very
Yeah.
early because I have been at FPA for quite a while. So it's been
Yeah. I think it was that first, maybe the first year we did the Florida
yeah.
conference.
So I can remember feeling then when I saw Homegrown Preschooler there, I can remember feeling like, why do you have to tell people to let their children play? I never
Right.
like, it never really connected in my brain why. And now
Okay.
I think it's interesting that, fast forward a few years and it feels like there's a lot of people talking about it because in that
Yes.
time frame, there's been more and more distractions, more and more screens, more and more time consuming provided activities that kids are doing that are, more scheduled and just everything. Sports early. I mean, some of the things that I hear blow my mind sometimes. But for people who really just didn't understand the need for play, and I like, where do you think that break occurred? Like in our years of growing up, because you and I were tracking on the same, growth years here 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, even with my own first child, we went to, I was still going to school some, working some. She was in childcare. But even in the childcare, there were the centers where everybody
Yes.
played and, they would go outside for a good amount of time. She wasn't reading at 3. I mean, there was nothing like that being forced. Where do you think that breakdown kind of occurred where all of a sudden now it's like we need to give permission to parents to just let them play or tell them why it's important? Where do you think that fell apart for
I
us?
think a couple things. I think one, it was the concept of earlier is better. I think
Mhm.
we bought into that as parents. Well, I mean, if it's good at 5, just like in Georgia, around the 90s, 2000s, that we started the pre-K program. So then instead of
Mhm.
kids going to school at 5, we moved it to 4. And so, well, at 4, now we were having the expectations that kids could accomplish at 4 what they used to be expected to do at 5, which in my opinion is still way too early and not developmentally appropriate. So I do think it trickled down from that. And I think parents are competitive. I think there's
Mhm.
something about, well, my kid can do that first. Think about how many times you've been around a parent say, and you've heard them say, "Hey, honey, show them how you know your ABCs. Hey, show them how you can say the presidents. Hey, tell them all that. Tell them what kind of butterfly that is." There's something about
Mhm.
that that gives us validation as a parent.
Mm.
And I think we are looking for that validation. I remember one of the first times I was speaking at a conference in Texas, and a mom came up to me and she said, "Listen, my 4-year-old is not reading yet. And I am getting so much pressure from my family because they do not want me to be homeschooling and they think already he's behind." This word behind,
Mhm.
no child left behind. Do you remember that? No child left
Oh, yeah.
behind. He's behind at 4 and he's not reading. And I mean, I was like, "Well, you need to tell them some things. And
Mm.
you need to," and I gave her all my tricks for how do you help a kid fall in love with reading. You do that by you help them fall in love with words and stories, and you tell stories
Mhm.
together, and you build stories together, and you get excited about books, and you read about the things they're interested in. And sure enough, this kid who's now 15, and that mom has ended up being so dear to me. We still are in touch all the time. That kid devours everything, and he did. He didn't read till he was about 8, but now he devours a book. She'll go in and find him with his little flashlight on, reading and reading and reading and reading,
Mhm.
because instead of learning to read, he fell in love with reading. And those are two
Mm.
very different things. But I think this whole do it earlier, do it earlier, do it early puts the pressure on the parents. And then I think social media doesn't help. I think the
Mm.
social media and someone putting on there, I mean, I saw the other day, there's an ads, your toddler can read. Oh my gosh, wait, my toddler can read? Then I'm behind if my toddler doesn't read. I posted on
Yeah.
TikTok yesterday, hey, I homeschooled for almost 30 years. What questions do you have? And sure enough, I knew it would happen. A mom's like, I have a 7-year-old who doesn't read and I'm worried sick. How do I get him to read? He's not interested in reading. Well,
Yeah.
I
It's
can't wait. I
crazy.
told her I was gonna make a video today because we know sometimes the brain isn't ready to receive reading until 8, even
Mhm.
9, and that it's
Yep.
not an indicator of how smart your child is.
Yeah.
But you're gonna do them more of a disservice by forcing the reading early than to helping them fall in love with reading. So, I think it's a combination of all that this whole earlier is better, and I'm thankful for people like David Elkind, who wrote The Hurried Child, which is a
Mhm.
great book to help understand how the brain works. I think we discount that. I mean, I think a lot in our society, we discount brain development. And if brain
Mhm.
development hasn't changed, even with technology, with all
Right.
the things. In fact, what we've seen is technology hinders
Mhm.
brain development starting at birth. I'm working on a new book right now for the first 3 years, because we now need to help parents be intentional there. Because
Mhm.
before you naturally would talk to your baby, and now we're seeing mothers using their phones as
Mm.
distractions, and the babies are not getting any facial cues, they're not getting any conversation, and they're talking later.
Mhm.
They're having sensory processing because their food is squirted in their mouth instead of being able to, when our babies were
Yeah.
shoving their food in. So we're seeing now the consequences of a technology reaching down to our infants and our toddlers.
Wow.
So
I love that you point that out, and I'm glad you're writing the book because I think
I'm
that
excited.
there's a lot of disservice given to families who don't get that education. Sometimes it's hard for me to feel like we do wait until people are ready to go to school, quote unquote,
Right.
before we talk to them about how to educate their children,
Yes.
and what we did naturally because we didn't have choices of screens to put in front of our kids or we had to occupy the child that was crying or wanting to crawl everywhere, wanting to do whatever we were doing. You had to work
We were
with it.
packing stuff to take to the restaurant. We were doing
Yeah.
all the things, and I sat at a restaurant last week watching this young child not only on his tablet, but at full volume on his tablet.
Oh,
So
yeah.
everyone around was being distracted by this kid's full volume because he had to get that noise and that stimulation above the conversation. And
Mhm.
the entire table's talking and no one's talking to this little child. It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking, to be honest. It is. Listen,
It
it's a
is.
tool. I don't want ever for parents to say, "Oh my gosh, she's anti-screen." Well, of course I am for the
Mm-mm.
brain, but I also understand it's kinda like a swing. Do you remember baby swings? We hardly even have
Mm.
them now. But remember, there were people who would use a baby swing for a few minutes, and
Yeah.
there were people who would leave their kid in a baby swing all day. Well, baby swings were never meant for kids to be left in all day. They were meant to be a
Mhm.
tool to help soothe the child, to give them some vestibular movement. It was meant to be a tool. And I
Yeah.
think screens can be a tool for a short amount of time in emergency situations. But honestly, children under 7 shouldn't be much of a tool at all. Because listen, if the brain doesn't get that connection, if connections aren't being made in those early years, the brain prunes it off. They prune off those synapses and then you can't get them back. So you can't waste those early years. You've got to build as many connections as possible because if not, they're gone forever. So, and
Yeah.
when a kid is in a screen, connections are not being formed. But when a kid's touching something, smelling something, playing in something, all kinds of connections are being formed that will be there
Mm.
forever. So it really
Yeah.
is a matter of
And it is
importance.
it's incredible to study it and to learn about it because very few of us really had that need or reason, but very few people were taught a child development or I think it's one of those
Right.
things they say it's the one thing you don't get a handbook for. You don't go to the hospital and give you a handbook on this is how your baby's brain develops.
But boy,
That's
wouldn't it be great if they did? If we
Mhm.
did, and that's why I wanted to start it in the homeschool work because I thought, okay, well, you have parents who obviously care because
Mhm.
people who homeschool, they want to do what's best for their children. And no one's teaching them about those early years and how important it is to build that foundation of play and how that play is going to be the very thing that helps them be able to do all that other learning better later. But if they skip
Mhm.
the play, the brain has to do a workaround for the rest of their years. And
Yeah.
no one was
It's
saying it
crazy.
at that time. So I was like, I'm going to say it.
I'm glad
So
you
anyway,
did.
I'm still
Yeah,
saying it.
that is good. And I wanna just say too, if we could take a moment because I have followed you and watched you for years going through these different seasons of writing and speaking and everything. But I do want to, if you're okay with it, to stop for a minute and just one of the things I appreciated when you mentioned a little bit ago that you took off from speaking from like 2019 until I'd like to think about, the seasons of life that we're in and
Mm,
the way that we respond and taking in, just your time with your family, spending time with your kids, and how when you develop that as a young mom with your young children, I don't think that goes away. Those relationships are there and you suffered loss. And, I would love to hear your thoughts on, just in reflection, like what it meant to you to take those seasons that you needed from the time that they were young and you were homeschooling to experiencing losing a child at a young age and how you worked through that. And
mm.
just to encourage people, because I think so much of the time people are so caught up in the busyness of life that we forget the relationships that we have and they get pushed aside easily.
I love this question, and I think it gives me I got chills actually when you were saying
Mm,
it because all my kids are grown now. Well, somewhat
mhm.
grown. My youngest is 19. My oldest is 41. And if I had skipped those moments of connection, I would be paying the price now. And
Mm,
what I hear so many times, I hear adults, the children and parents of adults say, my kid doesn't come home. They don't want to have a relationship with me. They're not, it's like they flew the coop and that was it. And the kids will say, we not only are kids cutting off parents, right? The kids are cutting
mm,
off parents and in-laws right and left. And I always go back to tell me about that relationship when you were little. Tell me about that connection. And listen, Suzanne, my kids will get on here and tell you, not a perfect mom. I made a
mhm,
lot of mistakes. But one thing that I am super proud of and preach it as much as play is that you've got to invest in your children when they're little. Because if you
mm,
don't show up for those mundane moments when they're little, when they want you to read Goodnight Moon for the 400th time, when they want you to watch their dance, when they want you to listen to their story when they're 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, when they're 13, 14, 15, they're not gonna come to you. They're not gonna stay up late. And listen, I'm not a late night girl. I love to be in bed by 10 o'clock.
mhm,
But my kids, when they were teenagers, I was up till 1 and 2 listening to the angst of whatever they were going through because it mattered to them. But they wouldn't have come to me at 15 and 16 if I hadn't shown up at 3, 4, and 5. And now
mm,
that they're 19, 20s, and they still are calling me. They are still showing up. They still choose to come home over going with their friends sometimes because they want to be with us.
mm,
That is the result of showing up when they were little.
yeah,
And when Joshua got sick, well, and there were other times I took off from work. When my kids were little, I did also take off from writing and speaking for quite a few years. So I've had
mhm,
seasons where I've pulled away from my work because I do believe it's my ministry too. I do believe the Lord has gifted me with connecting with moms. So I do believe it's important work, but it's
mm,
not more important than my children. And
mhm,
so right after Joshua, who was my most delightful soul, if you don't know Joshua, go stalk me on Instagram and see pictures
mhm,
of him. His smile would light up. He was quiet. He was funny. He wanted to live in his pajamas. He had 0 goals in life, which drove me crazy. But I think he must have knew that his time was going to be short.
mm,
But he changed us all, the children, and they suffered when their brother died. And had I just been suffering so much that I ignored them, I think we'd be in a different place today. One of my daughters developed disordered eating. I mean, right after. She
mhm,
developed anorexia actually during his last couple of months because she couldn't control it. She was the closest to him. And so we buried him in May, and by July, we're in full-blown crisis. Just
mm,
2 months later with a 16-year-old daughter battling anorexia, battling for her life. And thank goodness she came to me and said, "Mom," and I had already suspected she had a problem. I had already brought it up to her, to which she denied. But she came
mm,
to me and said, "Mom, I think I need help."
mm,
And I don't think she would have been able to do that again had we not had that relationship building up for 16 years. So what you do with your children at 2, 4, 6, 8 matters. Don't discount that and think, "Oh, when they're teenagers, we'll hang out all the time." No, you
mm.
won't. If you're not hanging out when they're 3, if you're putting them in front of the TV or you're sending them to a play date when they're 5, they're not gonna come to you and say, "Mom, I think I have a problem."
Mm,
It just isn't gonna happen. And so, the lessons I've learned since Joshua passed away, don't make 2s 10s. Most of what you worry about as a mom or dad doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you raise children who know that God is there for them every day, all day. What matters is that they choose kindness and love above everything else,
mm,
and that they can know that you are in their corner. The little things that we hyper focus on, did they pass their test? Did they give it their all? Did they obey me the first time? It doesn't matter. It really
mhm.
doesn't matter. Now, I'm not saying discount, guiding
Right,
your children, but it
right.
can be done through love and connection and relationship. And that's what matters. I don't have any regrets with Joshua. I don't. I mean,
Mm,
we didn't bring him into our home till he was 10. We met him at 7 in the orphanage in Guatemala. Took 3 years to get him home. He was diagnosed with leukemia at 19 and died 16 months later at 20. I miss him every day. The waves of grief are horrific. I cry at the most unexpected times. I have a picture of a crow sitting right here that a mom sent me. It was a homeschool
mm,
mom that used my curriculum because crows come into my life the most bizarre ways, but I believe that's one of the signs I get from Joshua. I keep it right there to remind me that love is so powerful and parenting is a gift. It is hard, but it is a gift of the time that we have with our children. That's what I've learned. That was a longer probably answer, sorry.
No,
I get passionate
it was a great
talking
answer.
about him.
It was it was a great answer, and, I didn't know him except through watching you walk through that on Instagram, but I
Mm,
think the thing that is so profound to me about it is, like we've talked a little bit about it already, so many parents are so competitive, and even
mhm.
from the time the child, when did they potty train? When did they walk? When did they crawl? When did they say their first word? All of the
Yes.
things. And even if they don't know they're competing, there's a lot of competition to show off and to put those things out there. And it is hard sometimes to step back and close yourself off to all of the things that the world is feeding us with the speed of light. I mean, because we are so constantly being hit by so much information and so much social media.
Yeah.
I can't imagine starting out as a parent that way. Like, honestly, I'm so thankful. Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to see the lack of relationship sometimes when you are sitting in a restaurant or when you are walking, into church or just whatever it is, that the lack of relationship that it seems to be there with the parents and their children is heartbreaking to me. So I want us to overcome that. And I want parents to hear that there's really a better and a different and a more God ordained way of doing this. It's not the way that you're doing this right now.
I would
So,
agree, and it is amazing to watch, and it's interesting. I find myself I do it intentionally. Everywhere I go, I sit and watch for the interactions. I remember we went to New Zealand one time, and we visited a park because I'm drawn to them, right? I'm drawn to
mhm,
children, so it was a lovely, lovely park in Christchurch.
mm,
And what I noticed, nobody, not one parent, and I mean not one parent was sitting on a bench on their phone.
yeah,
Every parent, grandparent even, they were up interacting with the children. And they weren't necessarily sliding down with the child, but they were engaged. They were watching, they were encouraging, they were having conversation as the children were playing. And listen, I tell parents all the time, hey, it's not your job to get in there and play. In fact, most of the time when you get in there and play, you're interrupting because we
mhm,
don't think the same. We think limiting where kids think limitless. But
yeah,
in this case, it's heartbreaking also if you ever go to a park, you watch. It is like the benches are lined up with the parents on their phone and the kids are just kind of playing. And that too is heartbreaking.
mm,
I was also going to say just a couple weeks ago, it was crazy. It was in 1 week, I had 3 different moms contact me, young moms,
mm,
wanting to see if I could have a phone call with them. I do mentoring, do sessions, and so we had phone calls. They all 3 said the same thing, and it was crazy. I was like, "This is so I couldn't have made this up if I wanted to." What they said was, "I don't know who to believe online." Just speaking of
mhm,
online, there's so much parenting advice online right now. There's so many people giving opinions. Who do I trust? Whose opinion do I trust on? Is this the right way to guide a child? Is this the right way to teach a
mhm,
child? They said it's overwhelming, that they're just
It is.
overstimulated as a parent and don't know who to trust. And so my advice to them was, and I think this is good to share here.
Mhm.
If you're online and you see someone who is giving you parenting advice, ask yourself a couple questions. What's their background? Are they a
Mhm.
child development specialist? Are they a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist? Are they a coach, a parenting coach? Or are they just someone giving their opinion? Because we all have opinions. But what
Mhm.
is their information based on? Is it based on brain research? Is it based on their experiences only? Is it based on what? So get to know that. I'm going to dare say this based on my story earlier.
Mhm.
Where are they in their parenting journey? Is their oldest child 5? Because if
Yeah.
their oldest child is 5 and they're giving you teenage parenting advice, or if their oldest child is 2 and they're giving you, 5-year-old advice, again, be cautious because there is
Mhm.
something about wisdom having lived through that. So
Right.
know who you're following and what their background is, where they get their information, and what their experience is. And then always try and find an older person in real life, a real human lady.
Mhm.
And most older women would be so honored if you came to them and said, "Hey, you know what? I watched the way you parent. I watch your older children still have a relationship with you. Would you be willing to mentor me? Just be a sounding board for me to ask questions when I'm confused about something." I bet
Mm.
most women would be thrilled to do that for you.
Right.
So, just that was so interesting. And when you said that, I thought, I get it. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
All of it is overwhelming.
It is, and I think that I love walking into a workshop, at our convention and going into there and just listening to the speaker say, "Let them play and let them do this and get down there, and do it."
Yes.
I think one time I was at the park with, my grandkids, and I thought, "There is nobody pushing the swing." That was the thing
Right.
that stuck out to me.
Interesting.
Nobody's
Yeah.
pushing the swing, the kids are trying their best, and
Yeah.
everybody's kinda consumed with that, and you see the young child running and begging the parent, "I need help," and the parents are just so distracted, and that's hard, not always. It is a lot of the time. I think the park is a safe place in your head to let them just run around and play and do
Mhm.
their own thing, and they're outside, and they're doing it. But
Right.
they still can't do everything. They still do need help in that development. And it's the opportunity to connect with them in a different way that you don't when you're inside your
That's
home,
the piece. We live on a lake now, Lake Martin in Alabama, and we have a little
Mm,
restaurant right by our house. And at that restaurant, it's a huge sand area. So it's so great
mhm.
because kids are always there. And this summer I was there and some friends of mine, their grandkids are I've kind of adopted them as my grandkids here on the
Yeah.
lake. And they were over there playing, so I walked over and, started engaging with them, and they're making little ice creams, and they're, "Miss Kathy, you want some ice cream?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. I want some ice cream. What flavor?" I'm asking all the things. But what was interesting, Suzanne, is I'm within about 5 minutes, there were at least 15 kids around us. At
Yeah.
least 15 kids. Why? Because I was engaging with these children,
Mhm.
and these children are starving for connection. I
Yeah.
wasn't doing anything grand. I was sitting in a chair right by the sand, asking engaging questions about what they were doing.
Mhm.
And kid after kid after kid kept coming up wanting, "I've got some ice cream for you. Oh, you want a waffle too?" They were all jumping in to be a
Yeah.
part of that conversation because they are starving for connection. And if you
Mm,
are homeschooling thinking that you are doing this great thing for your child academically, but you miss the connection piece, there are gonna be holes in their heart and soul as they grow up. You have got to put that connection above the curriculum. You just have
yeah.
to.
I love that comment. I
Yeah.
also love that when you're saying that, you're saying this, they're starving for connection. So much of the time, people think that your kids just want attention and they want attention, and somehow that gets a bad label sometimes. Like,
Right.
they're the kids are being obnoxious or they're whatever. What they want is the connection. And,
Yes.
I love that you differentiated when you said that because that is the important part for us as parents, as homeschool moms. I think just to be able, because, it's like that's your goal. It's like you were saying, if you want your kids to have a relationship with you when they're out of your home and they have their own children and all of those things, it starts when they're 1 and 2 and you're making those connections with them early on. And, I think that it's a phenomenal work that you've done. I thank you for your
Mm.
investment in the homeschooling community, especially because that's where I got to know you. But I think your story has just been an encouraging testament to the fact that, you don't even have to be a parent yet to understand these things and to take notice in what we need to do for our children and the seasons of their
Yeah.
lives, and, and just being committed to those and walking through those graciously as you parent them. Thank you. I'm going to, unless you have anything else you want to share. You know what?
Can I share my quote?
Yes, I was going to say, I want to hear that. And I also love your mantra.
All right. So my quote. So if you don't know my story, I had a huge crush as a young girl, and it was on Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, I truly believe, shaped me and prepared me for the work that I do. And so when I think about what quote really sums up my passion, and it's his quote that says, most people think of play as a relief from serious work, but for children, play is serious work. Play is the work of childhood. I probably butchered that quote. It's kind of paraphrasing, but that is what it says. It is that, adults, we think, okay, I'm going to get my work done and then I'm going to go play. But for children, the play is the work. The play is the thing that helps their brain develop critical thinking skills, that helps their language development, that helps the interpersonal relationship skills between, when they're fighting with their sibling. That's the thing that's going to help them learn to negotiate with a boss later or a partner later. It is the work of childhood. So, Mr. Rogers, so thankful for his influence on my life.
That. I know. And I love, isn't it? It's so sad that the world is growing up now without Mr. Rogers in it, because he was full of wisdom. Honestly, he was.
Truly. I got to meet him. I was speaking at a conference in Canada, and I got to meet him briefly not long before he passed away. And I mean, I was like a little giddy kid when I got he probably was like, stalker. But it was such a highlight for me to get to lay my eyes on him.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's a great place to sum it all up, because, and you hear too the comment so many times in our lives that if you love what you do, you'll be happy,
Yes.
And I think, where do we learn our passions? Where do we learn what we love? It's through exploring those things and having the opportunity to just like be out there and see, this is what we love. This is what I, want to do. And we don't have the time to do that if we don't have the time to do that. Right?
Well, and if we don't take the time as parents to observe our children and what they're loving to do, we're not going to be able to help them become who they were already meant to be.
Oh, absolutely.
So the way we do that is by observing their play, listening to what they're talking about, what they're interested in, and then letting them pursue those passions. That's one of the greatest gifts of homeschooling, is that we can deviate from the workbook and we can go help them cook if they love cooking, or we can go to the horse farm if they love horses. We can help them pursue their passions. And that's how they learn who they're supposed to be. So it really is such a gift.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah. And that was probably my favorite thing. I did homeschool 2 of my children all the way through, but before that I was a professional educator. So that was hard for me, because I wanted to bring education home instead of just learning how to be at home with my children. Right. I wanted to bring school home. So that was challenging for me to overcome that too in that first year. But for so many, years after that, I've seen the benefit of the people who, were able to do that with all of their children. All 5 of mine did not have the benefit of being homeschooled all those years, but
wow. Absolutely.
But I thank you for your time and sharing with us.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida, or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at FPEA.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.